fatigue. And now, just the word diabetes conjures up images of sleep loss, of just utter exhaustion, because this disease never gives you a break, it never loosens its grip, and it never goes away. And you all know that so very well. So that's what we first want to discuss. And Joe, since you're the person at the table that's lived with diabetes the longest, I want to know, what about diabetes exhausts you?
The whole thing. I'm ready to give it up if anybody wants to take it. For me, it's an ongoing thing, and I think for most of the patients and families that I work with, I think just staying in the game, suiting up and showing up takes a lot of energy on a daily basis. And it's not as if, we were talking before, it's not as if you can take a vacation from it. And I think if you don't have it, people think you just take your shot and then you're on your way. That's probably the easiest part once you've overcome that fear. The hard work is living with it every day. There's blood sugar checks, there's how many carbs I'm going to eat, there's if I'm going to exercise or not, and this is from hour to hour. I think someone once calculated if you're managing your diabetes well, you're spending about 2.5 to 3 hours a day just thinking about it. Just thinking about it. And so what I do to sort of deal with the exhaustion from time to time, which happens on a regular basis, is instead of getting depressed about being so exhausted, what I've done is I started scheduling my diabetes depression days. And I call my friends and I tell them next Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. I'm going to be depressed and exhausted, and I want you to call me every hour and tell me how courageous and inspiring I am. And I go out and I buy 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, fudge swirl, and chocolate chip cookie dough. And the biggest thing for me, though, out of all that, and then I sort of set my pay aside, and the biggest thing for me, though, the most courageous I feel, is calling into work and saying that I'm having a hard time and that I'm not coming in. Sam was talking before about how his son Joe sometimes has lows that are really difficult, and then has to wake up the next morning and go to school. And this is what I'm talking about. It's like, there's no rest for the weary with this disease. So for myself, this is how I sort of build into staying in the game, because I feel like it's a marathon, not a 50-yard dash. And for the families that I work with, I think I let them know that there's no shame in falling apart. You have to fall apart every so often. You have to be exhausted. You have to, moan about it and whine and complain and everything like that. It's just part of it,
Because it's important to strategize for every person
Yes.
in the family unit, isn't it?
Yep. Totally.
I mean, we can't leave anybody out
No, and
because
for
everybody's
parents,
touched.
no, and that's why I think camps for kids with diabetes are so good. They're good for the kids, but they're excellent for the parents. They give everybody a break. Diabetes tends to be the main focus in the family, even if you're integrating it well. And it gets exhausting just staying on top of it all the time and letting go and chilling and maybe checking 2 times a day, for the day, and taking a break and that kind of stuff. I think enables you to stay in the marathon.
Now, Kathy, the number one thing, we're talking about exhaustion and fatigue, but if we drill down further, sleep.
Yes.
And that's what I hear most from parents, is that they just wish they could sleep again.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of sleep and how they might be able to strategize their lives?
Sure. If you look at a 24-hour day, technically, 1/3 of our day we're supposed to be sleeping. And you ask yourself, and those of you listening, how many of us actually sleep during 1/3 of the day? Probably none of us.
Right.
So sleep is supposedly an easy task, but it's unexpectedly difficult to fit into our daily lives. And a couple things I want to talk about with respect to sleep. There's sleep quantity and sleep quality. And what we mean by sleep quantity is maybe you go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night and sleep until 7 in the morning. So you think, I got 8 hours of sleep. I should feel good. But did you get quality sleep? So when you laid down at 11 o'clock at night, were you thinking about what happened today? What should I have done differently? What's coming up tomorrow? You're fretting, you're planning, you're thinking about your child and the what-ifs and so forth. So you may physically be laying down for 8 hours, but you're not sleeping for 8 hours. Maybe you're getting 6 or 5 hours of quality sleep. And so that's one of the things we need to think about. A lot of the sleep specialists say when you wake up, you should feel refreshed. right? How many of you feel refreshed when you
What's
wake
that?
up? Yeah, what is
It's a
that?
universal no at the table.
What is that?
Refreshed?
But interestingly enough, a lot of the studies show too that we develop a tolerance for sleep deprivation. So what happens is you get used to not feeling refreshed, and that becomes your norm. So you don't even realize that you're sleep deprived. And what happens with sleep deprivation is it affects us in terms of our physical ability, our cognitive ability, and our mood. So decision making, we're not as good at making decisions, which impacts us and our kids when it comes to diabetes management. We may be more irritable, we may be moody, we may not take the time to plan and think. And so when we talk about communicating with other family members and having, just the ability to take a day off or to say, this is my day, if you're sleep deprived, you may not even think that you need that.
I have to tell you that one of our participants online just entered a comment which blows my mind. This is the best comment. She said they have installed a doorbell by their daughter's bed, and she rings it for assistance. And since then, they've been able to sleep without worry.
I love it.
Wow.
That's a wonderful idea.
I mean, I wish I had one of those.
That's a great idea.
We, with my son, because he's real active in sports and everything, so he sleeps hard when he's asleep.
Yeah.
So he's 13, we have a baby monitor in the room, and then we have an intercom that's not always on, so we can hear him on his side. He'll wake up and won't ring the bell, but he'll say, hey, I need some help, or I'm sick, or whatever his case may be. And then we can communicate back with him by hitting our little receiver going back into his room so he can hear us.
Okay.
But that's the only way. And you were talking about
Yes.
sleep deprivation.
Yes.
He can sleep hard, but on the days that we know he's had a huge active day or,
Right.
or issues with blood sugars,
Right.
we listen to that thing, and then we have to go up there and test him. He sleeps on the upper floor, and we're on the first floor, so we've got to go up the stairs.
Yes.
We try not to wake him up, test his sugar, and and the fatigue on that, he's fatigued, even though he's not waking up, he's not getting a solid sleep.
Right.
We're fatigued by
Exactly.
listening to the monitor, or we're
Exactly.
taking care of this. So the fatigue factor, and that we all laughed when you said, are you sleeping? Yeah, we're sleeping as best we can, but
Right.
that's the disease, and
Right.
I'm sure everybody that knows diabetes knows that's the fact.
Now, what do you guys do in your house with you and your wife? Do you negotiate who has which day to get a full night's sleep?
No, we both sleep together, and we listen to the monitor, and generally one of us will go upstairs if something goes wrong. But I mean it's not every night, so he does sleep good some nights. But it's the 24-hour care that you never know. We were talking earlier amongst ourselves that you don't ever have a break. So when is that low going to hit? When is that cry out going to come out in the middle of the night? I need help. I'm heading to the bathroom to throw up when my blood sugar is crashing. You don't know when that's going to hit, so
Right.
you have that monitor always on.
So there's always a level of sort of low-grade tension.
Well, it's
Exactly.
not distinction.
What's
I mean,
gonna
we're
hit
used to it now
We're
after
alertness.
years.
Right.
It's an alertness.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I can wake up on a blink of an eye
Right.
from that monitor. So, and people say, oh my God, my baby's crying. It's 6 months old. I've been doing this for 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I'll continue to. You have to do it. So it's
Of
not
course.
a problem.
Right.
What about you and your
Well,
experiences?
I tell all parents that you'll never sleep again until your children leave for college. Because you always sleep with one eye open, with
Yes.
diabetes or without it. But I thought when Robert left, he's got under control, he's going to do well, and then Peter was diagnosed. So now I don't sleep well thinking about what's going to happen to him. I'm afraid to go to sleep because I know as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm just racked with worry. And it's just, until we learn to live with Peter's diabetes, which we're learning that process right now. We're still going through that stage of grief with diabetes. I think it's a never-ending process with grief. You cry for a life that you never had or a life that you missed. You cry for a good night's sleep. Then you feel kind of bad because you're like, just feel good already because you're so tired all the time. And my children are across the country,
Right.
and when the phone rings, if they call me at 10 o'clock, my heart jumps out of my chest like, what happened, what happened, what happened? So right now I'm in that grieving stage still with Peter John and learning how to get a good night's sleep. I went to my doctor and I told her everything. Like
Yes.
I said,
Yeah.
we need to tell our doctors, our psychologists, our gynecologists, what's going on in our life. I said, I have got to get some sleep. I am so physically exhausted that I'm no good to anyone.
Right.
And I I should be having a life of my own
Right.
to a certain extent.
Right.
Because my children are halfway across the country, but you can't live unless you get some sleep.
And I'm glad you brought up the idea of talking to
Yes.
the doctor, to mental health professionals, to significant others and support folks, because the lack of sleep impacts your overall quality of life. And then you can't be a good parent. You can't do a good job at your work or anything else, and you don't have enough energy to have fun. You don't enjoy your life. So that's critical too, to share with others, and those folks may be able to help you with stress management types of strategies, coping strategies, to allow you to at least get some quality sleep.
The
Let's
other
talk
thing
a
that I
little bit
think a
about-
little bit that contributes to the exhaustion is the having to swim upstream all the time, you know? And there's a certain sense of, you get used to that as well. It's sort of like
Yes,
fighting
right,
it, wrestling with it, you know? And for me and for the patients that I work with, and my personal experience particularly is that this serenity prayer for me really works to help like reboot my computer. Meaning, God grant me the serenity to accept the things
Yeah.
I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a way that I help myself let go, and have offered as advice and counsel to the patients and families that I work with, which, whatever your prayer is, or whatever your little mantra is,
Right.
you know, whatever works for you, I think that's the way to go. But just to be aware that you can let yourself off the hook, and that if you don't, it's going to cause a lot of frustration and
Exactly.
fatigue.
I'm going to use that today. I'm going to let myself off the hook today.
You know, it's interesting because this conversation about fatigue has taken a couple of turns, and we've broached fear, a lot of fear of hypoglycemia in particular, and that's robust throughout the literature and science on diabetes and parents and stress. But we've also kind of come to the spirituality and quality of life elements. So let's dive deeper and get real practical now. You know, what are the specific strategies that you've heard about in your practice, or that you know about that we can reference, so that the parents can then start to go, okay, maybe that'll work for me, or maybe I'll try this one. And then I want to hear more about specific strategies that you've utilized as well. And I'll throw into the mix one last thing, that the fatigue is both for the parents, but then also for those young people who grow up with diabetes. It's evident there as well, and Joe, you know that all too well.
No, I would say that, as I was saying, try and schedule some diabetes depression days or days off, or something that you can do to just sort of relax a little bit and break down and cry, you know, that kind of thing, and allow yourself to do that. Sometimes in two-parent families, for one parent to be doing, you know, all the diabetes stuff one day, to give the other parent a break. Also, to let the family take a break from diabetes for siblings, meaning that it's important that siblings know that they can have parent time that has nothing to do with diabetes, and just work that somehow into the schedule so that everybody gets their due. You know, most siblings that I've worked with over the years don't mind giving away some of the parental attention to their brothers and sisters, because they feel like they're ill and they need the help. But I think they don't, you know, it's nice to sort of let them know that it's not always all about diabetes, so taking a break in that respect. And I think also for the parents to get away and to develop support networks where they have babysitters or extended family that can take over for a couple of days and allow them to go out for dinner. And actually, if I was a babysitter, I'd take their cell phone away from them, so that they can't call, that they just, you know what I mean? Just, you know how you check into some hotel sometimes, and they take your crackberry away, you know, that kind of thing, right? So the same thing, of just sort of making sure that you can set it up, and to push. As a nurse and counselor, I always tell the families, listen, the other thing that I'm going to be scoring you guys on is how well you take breaks. That is as important as adjusting your child's insulin dose. So that's my experience.
Yeah. And I'd like to speak to sleep hygiene in general, which works, you know, it applies to parents and it applies to kids. And things like having a regular routine bedtime, particularly for kids, but for parents as well. You know, we get caught up in kids at school, homework, extracurricular activities, doing laundry. You know, before you know it, it's midnight and you got to get up at 5, and there goes your quality and quantity of sleep. So having that regular bedtime, having a regular routine. It's recommended that in bedrooms there's no television, there's no computer. Kids can't take their cell phones in, so they're not texting at all different hours. And I love what the parent recommended that tweeted in and said, you know, they use the bell. So it's a way for communication, or you use the baby monitor. There's a way for communication around crises and situations when your child needs you and you need to check on them, but you take away the other types of distractions. And the other thing to think about is, what do we all do when we're tired? When we don't get enough sleep, we tend to ingest a lot of caffeine. If you ingest a lot of caffeine, that's just the opposite. It's going to rev you up, and then you're going to continue to have problems with sleeping. So avoiding caffeine the second part of the day. Parents avoiding alcohol as much as possible, because that can disturb sleep. So there are some general things just around sleep itself and sleep hygiene that can help.
Those are valuable insights. You know, the one thing that occurred to me here in listening to this discussion is that there's even fatigue on another level. You know, outside of our physical body fatigue, the fatigue of talking about diabetes. What do you do about that? To how you can work to make conversations about things other than your child's diabetes?
It's just, we do, and we make a point of asking about school and baseball and everything like that. Oftentimes it comes back to diabetes, but getting back to Joe's diabetic day off when he eats his ice cream and everything, my son, we have extra diabetic meters laying around all over the place. So what he will do when he's so frustrated with it, or he's had a bad time and he's trying to get out of this funk that he's in related to diabetes, we'll get an old meter and a baseball bat, and I'll go out there and pitch the bat to him, and he just
That is awesome.
crushes it.
That is
So it's his
totally
way to
awesome.
fight back against the diabetes. You know, he busts up the meter, and we hit it 4 or 5 times before it's completely shattered, and we've lit it on fire a couple times after that.
I don't do the baseball bat thing. I do hammer or drive over it with
Yeah.
my car.
Yeah,
But I love the
bat
baseball.
works
Yeah.
good because he's
Yeah.
swinging the bat and he's doing the damage.
It's great.
So he does that. I mean,
It's fantastic.
it's a neat little way for him, and it generally tends to bring him out of his funk and say, okay, we're back on top, and you know, because he's a great diabetic, you don't understand how good he does at this, but everybody has a bad day.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I've got something new to try.
Smash it, drive over it, whatever.
This is what you should tell your Peter and Robert.
It works.
I'm the bad one, because Robert called me the other day. He said, Mom, guess what? I'm going skiing for the first time. My first thought is, what you going to do with your pump? You're going to have insulin? You're going to take it? And he's like, Mom, you're ruining the whole ski trip for me, you know? But I'm like, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I go, but I'm your mother. I'm always going
So
to
it's
be
hard
this way.
to-
He's like, back off, Mom.
It's hard
I'm
to
just...
keep the discussion out of diabetes. out of
Sometimes it's the
discussion.
other way around,
Yeah.
because I will never let go. I will never stop her. And sometimes, and I said, Robert, it's not that I'm trying to nag you. I'm also curious as to how you are going to handle that. Because I'm learning through you also, and I'm curious, what does a diabetic do when they go skiing? What do you take with you? How do you bolus? Because I want to learn. I feel left out, and I don't want to be the illiterate one when it comes to diabetes. It's not just that I want to nag you to death. I want to know what's going on, you know?
No, but I think your point is well taken, Nicole, about what kind of strategies do we use to make sure that it's not all about diabetes all the time. Because it can be very frustrating for me when I've decided to put it in another drawer for a while. And then somebody asks me, how's your diabetes going? And it's a very nice question, and it's sensitive and considerate, but I'm going to strangle you now. You know, that kind of thing. It's like, oh my God. So it's a constant balancing, you know.
Yeah.
Feeling out of balance, re-establishing balance, and then back and forth, and that kind of thing. And I think that's the piece that most people who don't have it don't get. That, and I think it's with diabetes in particular and chronic illness in general, that there's a constant management principle that's going on that requires of you to pull on all of your internal resources in some way to strike a balance. Some days you'll have good days, you know. I try to look at it like a sort of film strip as opposed to one clip in the film strip. And that, okay, this one's not looking so good, but there are lots of other ones around it, behind it, and coming down that are going to be okay. And it's a question of, if I'm good and if my patients are doing 80% in the game, I think that's perfect. Yeah.
I agree. Where else can you be 80% and get an A+?
Right.
That's fantastic.
Diabetes, yeah.
Diabetes. You know, there's one more topic that I want to bring up, and it goes to what you were just speaking about, Joe. Balance. But I want to think about fatigue from the viewpoint of how do you help your loved one who lives with diabetes have the right kind of approach? How do you have this kind of positive conversation about, I'm fatigued as the family member or the caregiver, you're fatigued and worn out and just ticked off as the person with disease. How do you open that up and work together?
For my kids, I would say, forget your homework, forget everything. Let's go cuddle on the couch and watch a movie. Just complete, total, let it go, set it free. We have no responsibilities for a couple of hours. Because you're constantly being responsible.
Yes.
So, don't worry about homework. Don't go to school tomorrow. Sometimes you need a mental health day or a mental health couple of hours. Not to worry about that you can't finish your homework or that you don't feel good and everything. Let's just relax. Let's just be together and enjoy it. And that really helps a lot.
I think from a perspective of family dynamics, I think one of the things that most parents are most worried about is, am I doing enough to make sure that my child's being responsible enough and being well enough? And I think that one of the easiest ways to do it is not to have to revisit that question 25 times a day, but to have a plan set, like Kathy was talking about before, in terms of sleeping, also in terms of waking while living with diabetes. And I think, there should be some ground rules for how diabetes is handled in the family. And that that's the way we deal with it. That's how we roll in this family. And that if the rules are broken, then here's some consequences. If not, this way it's not like, the worst question for a teenager to be asked when they come down for breakfast in the morning is, what was your number? What did you check? As opposed to the parent asking, did you have any nice dreams? Or what are you going to be doing today? You know what I mean? Or what's your plans? This kind of stuff, right? So I think, if kids know that they need to keep a written record and parents know that they can go there to get it, this is just an example, right? That's the way it goes. If parents know and the kids know that, I have to check 4 times a day, and if I don't, something happens, there's no need to have a big diabetes argument in the middle of the day.
Right.
Treat it like a weekly report card, wait till the end of the week. And, okay, this is what happens, that kind of stuff. But some kind of plan for integrating the management of it so that it's not 24/7 than it is. Yeah.
Some of the, sometimes we'll talk about family rituals, and that would be like a family ritual. And you have other family rituals, like eating dinner together whenever that's possible, or going on vacations together, and those kinds of things. But that can be part of a family ritual, is you keep a diary, and I'm going to check it 4 times a day, or a log, and so forth. And as you said, that way, teenagers don't like to answer any questions, period. So, how you feel, they don't even want to answer that. So to have something where there's an expectation, but I'm not going to ask you all the time, I think that's a wonderful
And
suggestion.
the collaborative decision-making process,
Absolutely,
right?
right.
You want me not to nag you? You do your stuff.
Exactly.
I asked the teenagers, you want your parents, what's the easiest way to get your parents off your back? Oh, do what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Easy
There you go.
answer.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you for all of this fabulous input. I think what I've learned is that we have to get Joe out of the pen and paper ritual of writing down blood sugars, and we'll get you the electronic devices to upload it. Oh, but he's been successful for 52 years, so we don't get to.
Why change it?
But I have to tell you that some folks online did say, I'm getting a baseball bat now.
Yeah, way to go.
So we've learned some great techniques and some great strategies, and I'm appreciative to each of you for sharing those. Thanks for being a part of this.